Hello, one and all, and welcome to The Rural Impact. We are the podcast that works hard to connect the dots between policy and rural everything. I'm Michelle Rathman, and I mean it when I say I'm so grateful that you found us. If it's your first time listening, and for our subscribers and followers, welcome back. To all, let me just say I am willing you the best possible new year, and I'm saying so fully recognizing that in just a few days from now, America is about to experience seismic shifts where rural policies and policies that impact rural are concerned. All right, before we get into the future, let's talk a little bit about the past, because today we wanted to recap what we covered for you in 2024. And we're doing so in the hope that if you missed an episode, you might hear something here that piques your interest to go back and have a listen. All right, to kick off 2024, we focused on the work of Dr. Catherine Ortega-Courtney and Dominic Capello, and this is supported by New Mexico Senator William Soules. Now, we call that series Arriving at Thriving. And in a nutshell, it describes a framework for ensuring that 100% of those living in your rural community have the resources needed not only to survive, but to thrive. And I'm just reminded that change happens so much closer to home than we sometimes realize. So I hope, again, that you'll go back and listen to that and learn how you might be able to make a very big difference in your own rural community. From there, I have to tell you, I had a chance to talk with one of my favorite rural voices, and that is fellow podcaster Tony Pippa. And Tony is a senior fellow in the Center for Sustainable Development at Brookings Institution. And he laid out the connections between federal, state, and local policies and their rural impact. And from there, we took the show on the road where we recorded from the National Rural Health Association Policy Institute. And while we were in our nation's capital, I had a chance to go over to the National Association of Community Health Centers legislative meeting. And in both sessions, we covered a wide variety of topics related to rural health policy, the plight of America's rural hospitals, and health centers. Okay, in the spring of 24, we turned our attention to housing and homelessness. And it was one of my most memorable conversations. And I think it was yours too, based on the amount of downloads and feedback we received. It was with the author of Families on the Edge, Experiences of Homelessness and Care in Rural New England, and that was Elizabeth Carpenter-Song. Elizabeth is a medical and psychological anthropologist at Dartmouth College, and her research strives to center the lived experiences of rural community members marginalized by poverty, housing insecurity, mental illness, and substance use. I'm just going to say, on a personal note, I read a quote by Elon Musk. I would think it was a tweet that read exactly this: homeless is a lie. I have to say it infuriated me. And I think that if you read Elizabeth Carpenter-Song's book, we know that what he wrote could not be further than the truth. So moving into the summer months, we were very fortunate to have the support of Ascendium. And if you don't know Ascendium, they are an outstanding organization that believes learning after high school has the power to transform lives. And we certainly heard that in our 2 series that we did with them. And we talked about post-secondary education, many dimensions of that, job training and apprenticeships. And we also explored how policies have shaped racism and job inequality in the rural South. Very compelling conversation that was. The guest list for this episode, all of these episodes, truly embody a who's who of who's making a huge difference through their research and service to rural education. Moving on, I was also joined by those doing the needed work on the ground on behalf of rural Americans from the Department of Labor, USDA, HUD, HHS, and I was thrilled to have time with former Senator Heidi Heitkamp from the great state of North Dakota. And we also talked a little bit with Dee Davis, and both of those conversations with Heidi and Dee were focused on our series called Courageous Conversations about the 2024 election. Courageous indeed. One of the biggest highlights of the year for me was my conversation with Sarah Smarsh. You may know her work, her latest book, Bone of the Bone, Essays on America by a Daughter of the Working Class. Just really grateful for the time that she gave me as well. Another conversation we had, very relevant, very timely, was an episode that we did with Dr. Bill Hathaway, and Dr. Hathaway is with Mountain Area Education Center. It was an emotional discussion, and it was about the recovery efforts from the Western North Carolina floods caused by Hurricane Helene. Now, if you go to our show notes on our website, theruralimpact.com, and particularly that episode, we do continue to have links for you to visit of organizations who are still working on those recovery efforts. In the words of Dr. Hathaway, he said, please don't forget us. And we've made a commitment to him that we will certainly not do that. Other major highlights were 2 episodes that we did on the road. I was invited by the Nebraska Rural Health Association and the Nebraska Hospital Association to moderate a panel discussion that we recorded from there, as well as we hit the road and went to Bend, Oregon at the invitation of the Oregon Office of Rural Health, where we recorded a panel discussion focused on how federal agencies are working to address social drivers of health in rural Oregon and Region 10, which is all across the Pacific Northwest. We dropped that episode on National Rural Health Day, which is always the 3rd Thursday of November. So our thanks to all 3 of those organizations for inviting us to their neck of the woods to record from their annual conferences. Now, before closing out the year, because we do try and stay on top of things here, we were compelled to have a conversation about the possible impacts of a vaccine denier as the head of the Department of Health and Human Services and how this may influence rural health policy. In this conversation with Dr. Brian Castrucci and Matt Jacob, we also talked about the dangers of disinformation and public health, something that we know, even reading this past weekend, an entire article on disinformation and the influence that it has, I think it's something that we really need to be paying attention to and how that relates to policy as well. Now, to listen to any of the episodes I just mentioned, and there's many more, all you have to do is, again, visit our website at theruralimpact.com. Make sure you subscribe, because when you do, you will receive our post-series e-blast where we recap the series. We have in our show notes and resources, and we give you previews of what's to come and also opportunities to connect with us and share your rural impact as well. Okay, moving on to what you can expect in 2025. During the Biden-Harris administration, we saw how rural benefited in many ways. It's just not my opinion. It's the numbers, they say, don't lie. We know that there have been billions of dollars in investments, and we did see things like the creation of the Rural Partners Network, which we covered in an episode with Farah Ahmad, who at the time was the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at USDA. We talked about the 10-state initiative that really helped to expand capacity for rural. And we also talked about the intergovernmental working group focused on coal-affected communities. And we talked quite a bit about impactful legislation, including the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act. And in fact, according to research out of Brookings, there was over $460 billion, that's billion, in worth of opportunities relevant to rural. All of it connected to policy. That is positive news. And whether we continue to see policy that directs investments to rural remains to be seen, we're going to be watching. And we're going to be having conversations with experts to discuss the impact of the new administration and their support for or against investments in the programs that were already set up through Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS and Science Act, and so forth. Now, we're also going to be keeping an eye on developments related to tariffs and how these may impact America's farmers and manufacturers. We're going to be keeping an eye on immigration and the potential mass deportations that we've been hearing a lot about. I have been talking with experts in preparation for the upcoming episodes, and each of them tell me we can most certainly expect significant impacts on rural communities on either one of these fronts. So in addition to these major policy areas, we're going to be having more conversations related to rural health. We have more rural hospital closures and vulnerable hospitals. And we know that coverage in rural America, for example, is a significant challenge. We are also going to be keeping our eye on housing and doing some more series on rural housing and capacity building where that is concerned. I'm very concerned about that because in Project 2025, we do see that in the housing section that it eliminates everything related to equity and everything related to climate change. So that's why we've got to be having these conversations. We're also going to talk about transportation. It's a series that I've been wanting to do for quite some time. We'll include conversations about rural broadband expansion, and I'm really looking forward to a series that we'll be doing focused on the intersections between policy and philanthropy. We're also going to be talking about opportunities and challenges for aging in place, climate impacts, and one that just popped up on the radar screen for us right now is we're going to be having a conversation that focuses on what it would mean if the Trump administration followed through with a plan to privatize the U.S. Postal Service. So if you've got ideas for us, we want to hear from you. These are just some of the things that we have in store. Again, let me just say, I am grateful to all of you. We know that you have many options for podcasts to listen to. There are thousands and thousands of them out there, and we are just grateful that we have made your list. We hope that you'll become a follower, subscriber, and share the rural impact with those in your network. We close out by saying I want to thank Bria Corsaro and Sarah Staub. They are a mad creative team. They always make sure we get a podcast dropped on time. These are very busy times, and so to them and to you, I am grateful. Well, that's it for our first episode of 2025, just a sneak preview of what you can expect. So until next time, remember to take good care of yourself and everyone else around you.